For more than 4,500 years, the Great Pyramid has stood in the Egyptian desert. Its stones are still there, millions of them. Some weigh more than a modern car. Others are far heavier. And the strange part is not that the pyramid survived. It is that the people who built it had no steel cranes, no diesel engines, no modern trucks, and no powerful machines to lift those stones into place. They had copper tools, wood, rope, stone, water, and thousands of workers. Yet somehow, they created the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. The first problem was not the pyramid itself, it was the stone. Huge blocks had to be cut from solid rock, separated from the quarry, and moved across the desert. Then came an even harder question. How do you take a block weighing several tons and raise it higher and higher when there is no crane to lift it? And as the pyramid grew, every mistake became more dangerous. A small error at the bottom could affect everything above it. So how did ancient builders solve a problem that still looks almost impossible today? The answer begins far from the pyramid itself, inside. A quarry where the first massive block was waiting to be cut. Inside the quarry, the first challenge was not lifting the stone. It was separating it from the ground. The builders could not simply cut a block loose with a single powerful tool. They had to work through solid limestone using copper tools, stone hammers, wooden wedges, and enormous amounts of labor. And every block had to be shaped carefully. Too much force could crack the stone. Too little would waste precious time. The quarry slowly filled with the sound of pounding rock, strike after strike, day after day. But there was something unsettling about the scale of the job. The Great Pyramid eventually required millions of stone blocks, most weighing several tons. That meant the quarry was not producing a few impressive stones. It was producing them continuously. And once a block was separated, the real problem began. It had to leave the quarry. Workers could drag heavy stones across prepared surfaces, but moving several tons over dry ground was brutally difficult. Friction fought every step. The ropes strained. Wooden sledges scraped across the earth. Dozens of men had to pull together, keeping the load moving instead of allowing it to sink or stop. Then came a discovery that changed the problem. Wet sand could reduce the resistance beneath a heavy sledge. It sounds simple. But simple solutions mattered when every extra kilogram had to be moved by human effort. Still, the quarry was only the beginning. Some of the stone needed for the pyramid came from nearby. Other materials had to travel much farther. And the heaviest, most difficult stones were not waiting beside the construction site. They were hundreds of kilometers away. The builders had solved the first problem. Now they faced something far more dangerous. How do you transport enormous stones across Egypt without a single wheel carrying the load? The answer began with the Nile. Instead of dragging every massive block across the desert, the builders used Egypt's river system to move stone by water. This changed everything. A block that was almost impossible to drag for hundreds of kilometers could become far easier to transport once it was loaded onto a large wooden vessel. But getting the stone onto the boat was another problem. The blocks were enormous. One mistake near the river could send tons of limestone crashing into the water, and there was no modern crane waiting to recover it. The workers had to control every movement. Ropes tightened, wooden supports shifted, men pulled together as the massive blocks slowly moved toward the vessel. Then came the journey north. The river carried stone toward the construction site, but the pyramid was still, not beside the water. The final distance had to be crossed over land. And this is where the scale of the operation becomes difficult to imagine. Thousands of blocks were arriving, again and again, day after day. But there was a hidden advantage. The ancient Egyptians were not trying to lift the entire pyramid at once. They were building a system that allowed each individual block to move gradually upward. That meant ramps, sledges, ropes, and human coordination became more important than raw strength. Yet the higher the pyramid rose, the more dangerous the process became. A block that slipped near the bottom might damage almost nothing. Near the upper levels, the same mistake could send tons of stone crashing downward. And suddenly, the builders faced their greatest problem yet. They had learned how to move the stones, But moving them upward was an entirely different challenge, because the pyramid was already rising toward the sky. And somewhere above the growing walls, a massive stone was waiting that would test everything they had built. The higher the pyramid rose, the less forgiving the construction became. At ground level, a heavy block could be dragged into position with room to maneuver. Higher up, there was almost nowhere to go wrong. The builders needed a way to raise stone continuously as the pyramid grew. The obvious answer was a ramp, but that created another problem. A ramp steep enough to reach the upper levels would have required an enormous amount of material. And the farther the pyramid rose, the longer that ramp would need to become. So the builders had to find a better way. This is where the story becomes uncertain. Archaeologists have found evidence of ramps and other construction methods, but there is no single surviving blueprint, showing exactly how every block reached the top. That missing piece has puzzled researchers for generations. One possibility is that different methods were used at different stages. A broad ramp may have helped move the lower courses. Smaller ramps, levers, or other systems may have taken over as the structure became higher. The twist is that there may never have been one giant ramp carrying everything. Instead, the builders could have adapted their methods as the pyramid changed shape. But even that leaves a terrifying problem. Some of the stones inside the pyramid were not ordinary limestone. Granite had been transported from far to the south, and some of those blocks weighed dozens of tons. Moving one across level ground was already a huge task. Getting it higher was something else entirely. The workers were now approaching the most demanding part of the construction. The chambers were rising, the walls were closing in, and above them, massive granite blocks had to be, positioned with extraordinary precision. One mistake could destroy years of work, and the heaviest stones were still waiting. The granite had to move. And this time, there was almost no room for error. The heaviest stones came from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers south of Giza. They were cut, moved to the Nile, loaded onto boats, and carried north toward the construction site. But reaching Giza did not mean the difficult part was over. The stone still had to reach the pyramid, then it had to rise. And eventually, it had to fit into a structure where precision mattered more than speed. Inside the pyramid, the builders created chambers that required enormous granite blocks above them. Some of these stones weighed many tons. There was no crane powerful enough to simply lift them, so the builders had to make the structure itself part of the lifting system. As the pyramid rose, temporary ramps and working surfaces could carry the stones upward, but gravity never stopped fighting them. A single rope failure could send a massive block sliding down the slope. The men below would have almost no time to escape. Yet the most surprising part was still ahead. The builders were not simply stacking stones until they reached the top. They were maintaining alignment across hundreds of feet of rising structure. The pyramid had to remain remarkably straight. Its sides had to meet at the correct angle. Its chambers had to remain positioned correctly inside the growing mass. And somehow, ancient workers achieved extraordinary precision without modern surveying equipment. That suggests something important. Their greatest tool may not have been a machine at all. It was organization. Thousands of workers had to quarry, transport, shape, position, and measure stone in a coordinated sequence. But now the pyramid was nearing completion. The final courses were becoming smaller. The summit was approaching, and after years of exhausting labor, only one problem remained. How do you place the final stone at the very top? Because once that stone went up, there was nowhere higher to build. Part 5, OF5. The summit was getting closer. The final stones were smaller, but the danger had not disappeared. At this height, every movement mattered. A heavy block sliding even slightly out of control could damage the carefully aligned courses below. The workers had spent years building upward. Now they were working at the most exposed point of the entire structure. The desert wind moved across the unfinished pyramid. Below, the ground was already far away. Yet the builders still had to raise stone above themselves. The final capstone was not simply dropped into place. It had to be positioned carefully, aligned with the pyramids, 4 sides, and secured as the structure reached its finished form. And here came the surprising part. The pyramid did not require a mysterious machine. It required thousands of controlled movements repeated over years. Levers, ropes, sledges, ramps, boats, simple tools, and an enormous workforce organized with remarkable precision. The ancient builders had not discovered one secret device that suddenly made everything possible. They had built a system. Each individual step was difficult. Together, those steps became something extraordinary. Eventually, the outer surface was covered with smooth limestone casing stones, creating a far cleaner appearance than the rough, stepped core visible today. The Great Pyramid now rose above the desert. But the greatest achievement may have happened long before the final stone was placed. They had solved the problem one obstacle at a time, stone by stone, course by course, year after year. And yet one mystery remains. We know many of the tools they used. We know where much of the stone came from. We know ancient workers used waterways, sledges, ramps, and organized labor. But archaeologists still debate exactly how every stone reached its final position. After more than 4,000 years, the pyramid still keeps part of its construction process hidden, and perhaps that is what makes it so remarkable. The machines were simple, the engineering was not.